So I will officially call the September meeting of the Ann Arbor Energy Commission to order at about 5 after 6. Can you call the roll, please?
Yes, Commissioner Paleg.
Here.
Commissioner Hookham.
Yep.
Commissioner Linsky.
Here.
Commissioner Mursky.
Here.
Vice Chair Clevey.
Here.
Chair Appleyard.
Here.
Commissioner Schreiberg.
Here.
Councilmember Frenzel.
Indeed.
Commissioner Colvin Garcia.
Here.
Thank you. Approval of the agenda. Does anyone have any changes to the agenda that they'd like to make? If not, I'll call for a motion to approve.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Approval of the minutes. We have the minutes from, I believe it's the July meeting, since last meeting was a work session. Has anyone found any errors or omissions, things that they'd like to change in that?
Yep. Move to approve.
Second. All in favor? Aye. Thank you. Now we come to one of two periods in our meeting when we will accept public input on matters pertaining to energy. If there's anyone who'd like to speak, come on up to the mic. State your name.
Hi, I'm Dave Conkle, President of the Great Lakes Renewable Energy Association, and I am just letting you know that we're hosting a renewable energy happy hour next Thursday. That would be the 21st of September at Arbor Brewing from 5 to 7. And that's exactly what it is. We're not paying for your beer or buying you food, but we're inviting people who are interested in renewable energy to get together. Mark Clevey on your board has been very active in creating an Ann Arbor chapter of the solar enthusiasts here in Ann Arbor, and there'll be a lot of GLREA board members and installers. Come, hang out with like-minded people for a couple hours. It's GLREA's attempt to start having some fun.
That sounds like a good idea. Thank you, Dave. Anyone else?
Hi, my name is Craig Tepfer. This is National Drive Electric Week, and there are a couple events locally that are worth noting. In Ann Arbor on Sunday at Whole Foods on Eisenhower in Ann Arbor Saline, there'll be a ride and drive hosted by Sierra Club and the National Drive Electric group. And there's also a event in Plymouth at Freudenberg, who's an automotive supplier. But they expect to have 19 electric vehicles there. And I think the Ann Arbor event will be well attended also. So I would encourage everybody to stop by and
Drive one away, right?
yeah, spend some time.
Outstanding.
Thank you. It's a great event. I've been to it several years in a row. I plan to attend this weekend, and it's a lot of fun, and you get to pop the hood and see the inside of some of these things. Great. Any other public input? If not, we'll close public input and move on to the energy report.
Yeah, well, just mainly a couple other events going on to make note of. Coming up quickly on September 14th, there is the Michigan Sustainability Conference, pretty broad title. The Department of Environmental Quality is helping to organize that. You can find out more at michigan.gov/DEQ events. It is September 14th, and it's an all-day event, but you can register. There is a cost to do so, but check it out at michigan.gov/DEQ events, September 14th. The 2017 WEGI lecture will be happening October 5th at 5 p.m. So Bill McKibben, I think, maybe done it before, maybe back. So if you're a fan of the 350.org movement or anything Bill McKibben related, from 5 to 6:30 p.m. on Thursday, October 5th at Hill Auditorium. Please make note of that. There will be there's another event that's happening September 29th, and you have to inquire. It's the Energy Club at the Ross School of Business is presenting their Michigan Ross Energy Conference. Folks can follow up with me for details in terms of the commission, but it's at the Ross Colloquium, 6th floor, 701 Tappan Street. The city will be a part of the panel. It includes state and local efforts around energy and sustainability, specifically designed to optimize collaboration between students, speakers, and sponsors through group discussions and breakout sessions. And again, that's Friday, September 29th. But you may want to check online, because I think space might be limited for that one. So, and with that.
There's also the, on Friday, October 6th, the Michigan Interfaith Power and Light Conference. It's going to be held in Lansing, so they just opened up the registration for that under www.miipl.org. And I know there's a bus going in from Maynard taking people down. So.
If I can add to that,
Sure.
the event at the University of Michigan on October 5th is part of a broader, it's called Michigan and Climate Crisis series of events from October 2nd through the 8th. And there are at least one, or in many cases, 2 events on every day. So if you Google that, Michigan and Climate Crisis, you can get to the events page, and they also have a listing on Facebook. So not only is McKibben speaking, but there's a couple of other prominent people, Sandra Steingraber and Michael Mann. Mann will be talking as well, so I encourage everybody who's interested to attend.
Do you have to register for this?
In that case, I just saw it this afternoon, logged on quickly, forwarded it a link to Nate. I don't recall, someone in the audience know if you have to register? I don't think you do.
Not for the lecture.
For sure not
Yeah.
the one you
The others
mentioned.
I'm not sure about.
Yep.
Excellent.
One other event that's going on right now is at the Novi Showplace Theater, whatever they call it up in Novi, but it's the Battery Show and Critical Power Symposium. Part of it's free, part of it's paid for, but it's tomorrow and the next day. So those of you interested in knowing anything about batteries, the exhibition hall is free. So you can talk to all the vendors that are out there manufacturing microgrid hardware and other things. And then part of it's paid for if you want to listen to lectures. But it's a pretty good deal.
That's great, thank you. Lots going on. Anything else from commissioners to report? Hearing none, we'll move on to a presentation by U of M students on Ann Arbor microgrids. I'm looking forward to this. We have to drop the screens.
As mentioned, we are all students from the University of Michigan, and Nick was a student at EMU. And we are going to be presenting to you how we spent our summer. We spent the summer researching microgrids. It started out as a year-out project and morphed into what we're going to present to you. My name is Kristen Dorfman. These are my colleagues, Will Arnook, Nick Soberall, and Ahana Schanbog. We were supervised by Adam Simon of Earth and Environmental Sciences, Susan Fancy of the Energy Institute, and we also had incredible help from Peter Knoop of LSAIT. All 3 of those people were key architects of this project, which we will share with you right now. So just as an introduction, we were tasked by the city at the beginning of the summer to investigate the feasibility of solar microgrids on municipal sites. They had 2 primary goals in mind, those being resiliency and carbon emissions reductions to help the city meet their climate action plan goals, of which the primary goal was to reduce carbon emissions and carbon dioxide equivalent emissions 25% by the year 2025 relative to 2000 levels. To put that in context today, that would mean reducing yearly carbon emission equivalence values about 568,000 tons per year, metric tons that is. And just as a side note here, that value is not a life cycle value and does not include up or downstream emissions. So a brief outline of today's presentation. We'll be taking you through how we did our whole project. We'll start out with our site selection, how we came to the sites that we decided to focus on. We'll take you through all of the numbers of our models for emissions values, generation values, and costs. Another aspect of our project was to appraise any policy concerns, which Nick will talk about later. We also have for you a list of potential sites that we could actually implement these projects on. Finally, we'll present our final recommendations to the Energy Commission, as well as any future manifestations and ongoing work related to this project. So to start out with site selection, we began in May in a conversation with a few city officials with a list of over 200 sites. To further narrow down these sites, we were given the criteria of using only city-owned properties within the city limits, excluding commercial and residential properties, and avoiding any parks or nature areas. This left us with a list of around 60 sites. From this list of 60 sites, we chose to focus on fire stations 1, 2, 3, and 4 for batteries microgrids. We figured the fire stations are emergency sites, critical for any power outages, and therefore that's why we chose to focus with them on microgrids. After that, we took another look at the longer list of sites in a thought experiment to focus on sites solely for solar generation, with the focus on reducing carbon emissions. From that led to explorations of parking structures, the landfill, and city schools.
This is a list of the sites we didn't evaluate and why. But, police department, city hall, we didn't look at for low solar generation, water treatment plant. We didn't have load data available. And the other parts were mostly due to timing concerns, which I'll talk about more at the end for why we didn't pursue other generation technologies other than solar and batteries.
Make sure you talk into the microphone because you're being taped and broadcasted. So,
Thank you.
Gotcha.
thank you.
So before we dive into the specific case studies that we looked into, I'll give you just the key takeaways, the key nuggets that our study boiled down to. Basically, microgrids were for fire stations. Given their emergency importance and critical resiliency factors, they were really the sites that we focused on for battery microgrids. However, they did not contribute very heavily to carbon emissions reductions. Shifting gears to the other half, explorations into solar and PV, the landfill and schools presented the biggest compelling cases for these, specifically Ann Arbor's 3 largest schools, Pioneer, Skyline, and Huron.
I'm going to quickly take you through the methodology we used for this assessment. So first, we visually assessed our city-owned properties using ArcGIS. Then we assessed solar potential using NREL's PV Watts model with weather data for Ann Arbor. And we validated those production estimates with data from operating projects in the Southeast Michigan area. We then used NREL's system advisory model to model battery storage. And we used national NREL life cycle analysis emission factors to estimate total life cycle emissions reductions for our scenarios. These are our assumptions for modeling. A few highlights: we modeled with 34-degree tilt, standard 15% efficiency panels. Our system cost was estimated using a $1.75 per watt installed rate, which is the current estimated install rate for Southeast Michigan, and a battery cost rate of $600 per kilowatt hour installed. We're happy to provide these assumptions to anyone interested.
So the first few sites that we looked at were fire stations 2, 3, and 4 due to their importance as well as their moderately low load. So in this table, you can see that for all 3 of the sites, the solar generation covers the entire load as well as produces excess, which could then be sold back to the grid via net metering, providing additional savings. Additionally, in the table, you also have the avoided electricity cost, which is essentially how much it would cost if the energy produced by the solar panels were instead bought from the grid. Next, we have the PV cost, which is the total cost induced by the solar panels and the installation, and payback period, which is how long it would take to pay off the cost given the electricity savings. So note that the electricity savings is assuming that the buy-sell prices remain constant. Additionally, the payback period for all 3 was approximated to be around 10 years, which is great considering solar panels' lifetime is approximately 20 to 25, so therefore for the additional 10 to 15, we would just be collecting savings. So While the previous slide simply demonstrated the solar generation capacity of these sites, in this table we also have included the additional battery component, which would increase resiliency. So NREL's SAM model actually takes the monthly data and models it into hourly given their local weather file for Ann Arbor. And with this hourly data, we then calculated the maximum consecutive 6 hours of load for each of the sites and sized the battery to hold that much. So with this battery comes additional resiliency, but it also comes with an additional cost, clocking in around $600 per kilowatt hours total installed. So this additional cost increased the payback period to approximately 13 years. Additionally, on this slide, you can see the total LCE emissions for the sites was calculated to be 81.4 tons of carbon per year, which isn't very high, but for these sites, we're prioritizing resiliency rather than carbon reduction. So in implementing the battery, we kind of visualized two major scenarios. The first being emergency discharge, in which case the battery would just simply collect the excess PV generation and store it until there is an emergency event where the grid could not be accessed, in which case it would discharge. The second would be load leveling, in which case the battery would discharge when the electricity rates are higher due to higher demand, and then collect when the electricity prices are low. So this would only be feasible if the electricity rates did change based on demand, which they currently do not. So we would recommend using the battery for resiliency because they are financially equal since the purchase and sale prices are equal. But if this were to change, we would recommend looking more into load leveling, as this would be able to collect more savings and thus reduce the payback period. Lastly, we looked into the Fire Station 1, which in contrast to the previous fire stations is much, much larger due to its central location. So with this higher load, a larger battery is required since we sized it to hold the 6 hours, the maximum 6 hours of load. The battery was sized to be approximately 628 kilowatt hours, which is huge, and the cost, as you can assume, is much higher as well. So you can see that without the battery, the payback period is 10 years, but with the battery, it more than doubles to 23. So with this site, it's kind of a trade-off between high resiliency and a higher cost, especially since with the higher load, the solar generation doesn't actually cover the full load, so you would also have to pull from the grid to meet the total load.
Next, we'll be transitioning into the second part of our explorations, which were strictly sites using solar PV only. Oops. For these sites, we looked into the parking structures, landfill, and Ann Arbor Public Schools, specifically the Maynard parking structure. These three locations were chosen due to their large land area and relative unobtrusiveness, and again, these are sites using only solar with no battery storage. The first of which is Maynard parking structure. Maynard parking structure, as you can see, has a higher solar generation and higher carbon reductions emissions than the previously looked at fire stations, while maintaining a payback period of about 10 years. This would be a raised carport type installation that would, again, harkening back to our assumptions, utilize about 50% of the roof area, while it would not negatively impact the number of parking spaces available on the structure. That makes Maynard parking structure an especially compelling case for solar development, given that it does produce a fair amount of solar generation and carbon emissions reductions while not negatively impacting its current land area use.
The landfill is another compelling option for solar potential and emissions reductions while not inhibiting the land use of community spaces. The total land footprint we looked at was 120 acres. We estimated that about 112 of those acres are usable with a visual assessment, which we further narrowed down to 56 acres, assuming spacing between panel rows as well as operation and maintenance. The solar potential from 56 acres represents 90% of the annual 45 gigawatts of electricity consumption for city-owned properties. Now, there are a number of ownership structures to consider. The proximity of the landfill to the Wheeler Center may make it possible to power the Wheeler Center from the landfill, giving the city another resilient center. However, there are concerns over ownership and the ability to run wires across property lines. Some other ownership structures to look at are community solar, which could potentially be a pilot program for the community of Ann Arbor. Another option to look at is a potential partnership with the University of Michigan to allow the university to invest in solar at the landfill. The Ann Arbor Public Schools could also serve as an effective and unintrusive use of community space. This would require further assessment of roof loading capacity. The schools have the most significant potential, though. This assessment wouldn't use green space or playgrounds. Only feasible parking lots were assessed, avoiding parking lots, say, at Pioneer, that would be used for RV or trailer parking. The total solar potential for the schools is rather compelling, as are the potential emissions reductions, all while implemented in a manner that does not impact how the community uses those spaces.
Okay, we're moving towards the end, so just to sort of reiterate some of the things we've concluded so far, there are benefits from both resiliency and for emissions reductions for most of the sites we've looked at, if not all the sites. Another option that we didn't consider, but we sort of looked at towards the end, were on-site gas generators, just as another additional source of generation. We realize some people are against using gas generators as an option at all, but it is an option to consider if load is the only concern. As Will mentioned, the landfill looks like the biggest opportunity based off of what we noticed, aside from the public schools. These things require partnerships and sort of more evaluation on how we could finance them and how partnerships would actually work in collaboration with the utility. Again, there's not really any policy framework that we've seen that actually allows for community solar or microgrids directly, but these sort of things can be done as pilot programs in collaboration with the utility. So I looked into the policy issues, as they said earlier in the presentation. The first thing I learned about policy was that it's way too complicated for me to learn as much as I needed to know in 2 months. That being said, I will try to at least walk you through what I learned, what I sort of concluded. So the main things I noted for barriers to microgrids were local zoning laws in some places, lack of tax incentives in some places, and lack of solar laws and easements, and these are especially true in Michigan. So there are vague or restrictive zoning laws, and the tax status of solar panels in Michigan can be a barrier to private investment on residential properties, but that doesn't necessarily apply to municipal properties as well, so that's something to consider. Another thing to consider, regulatory changes might be seen the next year. There's a lot going on at the state level right now from what I've noticed. These are mostly along the lines of distributed generation programs, green pricing programs, which I know DTE just rolled a brand new one out, which looks to mirror many aspects of community solar from what I've seen about the program. And ongoing PURPA reviews are also in the mix, which can affect the way qualifying facilities are determined and how they actually make money back. And as I said before, there's no state laws directly enabling community solar, so most of the community solar options that we look at would require pilot programs to be worked out beforehand. So conclusions from the study. We determined that the city's renewable energy goals can be met. We saw an earlier number for 2015 goals of, I believe it was 30%, is that what it was? This would be a big step in that direction. Based off of the life cycle analysis that we did for emissions reductions, we don't believe this would actually that if we did all the sites in the study, that it would adequately meet the cap carbon reduction goals. Resiliency for the fire stations is a definite possibility. This could also be combined with other generation sources like wind. And again, one more thing we also wanted to notice, which I'll talk more about this in a minute, is we kind of looked at the idea of determining if it's possible to do a microgrid in the core downtown area. And this was something that came up at the end once we started to get a better grasp of what the policy actually was, the policy concerns actually were for determining microgrids in Michigan, and especially with ownership structures. So this might be possible. We would love to look into it more, so that's one of the things we have in our future directions as well. And lastly, the public schools and landfills represent tremendous opportunity, and again, we think these are directions that the city should look if they're looking for microgrids or community solar. So final recommendations, we really recommend the keynote here, explore these relationships. So the main thing we've noticed is that ownership really complicates the way that energy can be efficiently shared and produced and distributed. So it really would be more beneficial if some sort of partnership could be worked out between the city, the schools, the university, any interested parties, because they all have similar goals. This is something that everybody can work towards together. Public participation, because Ann Arbor has such a huge renter population, it's not always feasible for residential owners, or renters I should say, to pay into solar systems because they're very expensive. But with community solar enabled, that massive renter population could actually help pay into some of the reductions goals as well. And finally, most of the landfill solar that we saw was done, in other states I should say, is done using power purchase agreements, so this might be something to look into as well, and I know that the city has done this with other assets before. We recommend that there is a review of local zoning laws that might affect the way that new facilities and new renovations are completed, just to make sure that there's no unintentional barriers to new construction. I know the city has done a lot with this recently. There's still more that could be done, I think, but there's definitely a lot of push in a positive direction from what I've seen in the past couple of years. And finally, it's definitely a good idea to partner with the community and utility to finance microgrids for student rental properties. This is something Adam brought up in our very last meeting, and we think it's an interesting idea to get the university and all these local renter properties on board because of the fact that we have a lot of renters in Ann Arbor, and a lot of them are college students. This could be something that could be worked out as well. And again, this is mostly all just pilot projects that would need to be determined later. Future work. We are looking to close the gap between emissions goals and identify more energy potential. This is something that we would love to look into more, especially new generation sources like geothermal, generation and heat sources. So geothermal, expanded hydroelectric at the dams if possible, small wind turbines. Another concern is resiliency for some of these sites. I know Will mentioned the Wheeler Center. The water treatment plant also could benefit from resiliency, we believe, as well. Any existing diesel generators being converted to natural gas. And again, we would love to look into the possibility of a core downtown microgrid of city-owned assets. From the landfill, it would be a lot of technical concerns with running wires that far, just in terms of power loss and ownership and efficiency and cost. But in the downtown area, it's a little bit more feasible, we think. At least we would love to look into it more. And lastly, working with the public schools to conduct a detailed assessment of school properties. Will is working on this actually this semester with Adam Simon as well. Hopefully, we'll see positive results on community solar and for financing for schools in general. So this brings us to the end. We would like to first of all thank everybody for allowing us the opportunity to present and for listening to the presentation. We would also love to thank all the people that were extremely helpful throughout this process for providing information and consulting with us. Chuck Hookham, I know many of you are actually here in the audience, which is actually pretty cool too. Chuck Hookham, Mike Bonnell, Wayne Appleyard, Laura Sherman from 5 Lakes Energy, Dave Conkle, I know he's around here somewhere. There he is. Kevin Self from Schneider Electric, Nate, Emily, and Josh from the city for providing us with all the data that we could possibly ask for and also always listening to our presentation notes, and the Department of Earth and Environmental Sciences. And with that, we would take any questions that you guys have.
Questions from the commissioners?
Just echo Nick's point in short order, you know, quite an undertaking when it's understanding policy or tackling something so large. So I think the output that we got is comparable to some semester or even year-long projects in some respects. So kudos to that, and thanks to everybody who did help them along the way.
Outstanding job. Absolutely.
So, yeah, great to see this in its final form. We'll want to follow up with you guys on some of the cost assumptions and things. I'm going to have a few questions on that I think might stretch out some of the things like payback that we've looked at. But certainly an optimistic view and puts it within reach, but I don't think it's too far off. So just happy to follow up with you on looking at that a little more closely.
I was just going to add on that one side of me says, boy, it'd be great to go back to college and do these kinds of things. You guys took on a big task and dissected it, really did a great job. And I was thinking, man, I don't want to be an undergrad and have to go through that degree of grief again. I don't really want to, even grad level, that was impressive. So good work.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I wanted to echo. I think that's a great bit of work. I'm sure they were paid like consultants, right? No. But you know, I think this is great. But I did want to ask just the basics on the cost assumptions, right? So your cost, particularly for solar, and you know, because a lot of times when we've talked about this and done some of the analysis within the commission, of course, the big barrier is the publicly owned facilities are not getting the 30% federal tax break on these. And so how did you factor that in, and how did you factor in the solar costs in particular?
Sure, I can answer that question. So I actually consulted a lot of people on this question. I had a conversation with Wayne about this. I looked through several reports from NREL, from various solar sort of crowdsourcing sites all over the internet. And there really wasn't a consensus on how much does solar cost. There are a lot of variables. Is it on a commercial site, a residential site? Is it large, is it small? So we kind of came up with a big list of values that ranged anywhere from $1.42 from NREL to $3.75 from an actual solar installer who had installed a 10 gigawatt installation on a home. And I used in the assumptions, the $1.42 from NREL because that was the most credible source that we could find. It wasn't from a person or it wasn't from a crowdsource, it was from a scientific institution. But we also thought that sounded a bit low. And I think the cost that Wayne gave me was about $1.75 per watt installed.
For a large.
For a large system, yes.
And that's the one you used, right? The $1.75? Okay.
Schneider Electric confirmed that value as well.
Oh, good.
As did DTE.
It's a pretty good number.
Yeah, so the payback period of 10 years is consistent with the current cost incurred by the city for those municipal assets at $1.75 a watt installed. Would be a 10-year payback, exclusive of tax credits, which the city is not eligible for.
And is that using the rate that the city's paying for electricity right now? Which I assume is less than, I don't know how the city does it, but I assume it's less than residential and things.
Did you adjust the value of that electricity for each project? Because some of them are on a standard commercial rate and some are on, what is it, a D11 rate or a demand rate?
They paid different rates, yeah.
Yeah, costs were kept consistent.
It'd be a
across the board.
sensitivity study.
The other piece would be the net metering that
Yeah.
was assumed in there and whether it was assumed at the retail rate or the wholesale rate, because depending on the type of installation, if it's non-residential, the payback would be at the wholesale.
I have a question. The payback obviously was factored against electricity use. Did you look at electric vehicles as a secondary offset on some fuels too? For example, if some of the parking ramp, if that solar was used to run the electric chargers.
So we actually discussed that for Maynard parking, and we're kind of thinking that the solar generation could be used for the electric vehicle charging.
Right.
But we couldn't find specifics on whether, since the electrical vehicle charging is pulling from the total parking load combined with the lights and like everything else that contributes, we couldn't find whether it was possible to hook up a battery specifically to the charging stations. So that's also further research.
So for further research, the person around who knows more about that than anybody else is right behind you. So when you look at that next time, you definitely should factor that in.
Yeah, that was what we were thinking.
So another question, I think on one of the early slides on the fire stations, it looked like you were generating considerably more than the fire station was using. That gets to be a little bit problematic in that DTE doesn't like to have you produce more than you use. So you might have to go back and downsize those systems to try and meet only 100% of the annual load, as opposed to some of them looked like they were significantly larger.
That was going to actually, by the way, kudos also from my side. Did you talk with DTE at all? You noted at the beginning that there are policy issues and state law issues. Did you talk to DTE to see how feasible some of your plans were? We have utility representatives on the commission, so it's an opportunity to do so now, but I'm curious, did you do so? Because what we find in a lot of the cases, what we're trying to do from the city side, we run up to obstacles that are embedded in state law and what utilities will allow us to do and not allow us to do. So did you have any contact with the utility representatives?
Chuck.
Susan?
Yeah, DT, early on, they were aware of the project, but they didn't have resources to be able to interact with students. Next time, call me. Always available.
Other questions? Great job.
Excellent.
Looks like a lot of work. And hopefully we'll be able to use some of that and
Yes.
do some more solar in Ann Arbor.
Excellent. We will have copies of this, I assume?
Sure. Yeah, this is actually, it's posted now on the Legistar site.
Outstanding. Great job. Keep it up.
Yeah.
Nick also has
We have
several paper
We
copies
have
if you
paper
want.
copies if you want a physical copy as well.
Yeah,
I
no,
would encourage you, all of you, to stay engaged
Yeah.
as voters, as advocate for climate action and things like that. There's a lot that collectively and individually we can influence, and if we all give up, then we've lost the battle. So keep on keeping on.
You bet.
Certainly with all your free time while you're, you could volunteer for one of our subcommittees.
Yeah.
Yes.
We need all
We
help.
can start up a microgrid.
Nick's already done that.
Wayne, there's a question. or
There's a
comment
question
back here.
from the audience.
I just had a comment on the resiliency for the fire stations. They're required by law to have an emergency generator that's fully capable of handling the entire load. And when you combine that into the solar battery system, you will find that the last 10% of solar battery is the most difficult. And if you did 5 or 10% with the generator set, you could take a big chunk of the battery cost out and bring that 23 years
Probably
down.
not. Good for him.
Something a little better.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So just
Something to consider.
hybridizing the
Yeah.
power supply system, a generator and a solar panel work better at 95 and 5%. And the solar panel is
And that's another thing worth mentioning. When we started out the study, we did look at other generation sources, solar, wind, combined heat and power, but we decided to settle solely on solar due to our time constraint.
Probably a good move.
Good move, yeah. It's the most adaptable, so.
If there are any other questions or comments, thank you very much, and keep up the good work.
Yes.
By the way, you might want to stay for the next agenda item, because we're going to talk about a resolution that would commit the city to power all of its operations by 100% renewable energy. So directly ties to what you're talking about.
What a segue.
What a segue, man.
Resolution committing the city of Ann Arbor to using 100% clean and renewable energy for city operations. Who would like to start discussion on this?
Do we have to have a motion to introduce this?
Well, that is true.
John, you want to do that?
So moved.
Second.
Discussion.
Mark?
Well, this started with the Sierra Club's presentation that were in our minutes today, 2 meetings back, and I'm glad to see that it has wended its way through the Nate's office and others, and John has provided some really valuable meat to this with Chuck's strong recommendation that we do so. So Chuck, I guess let me flip this to you and say, is this the, I said 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 down is the load we found. And I guess that was the primary concern last time we brought this up.
So let me just add to that real quickly for those in the audience. As Mark mentioned, this came up 2 meetings ago, and in that meeting and in the last working session and in a lot of email correspondence, we are at the point where we have a resolution for consideration. Maybe before Chuck comments, maybe even Nate, well, maybe we should read it, and Nate, maybe you should comment on the usage figures.
Yep.
And then maybe we can also talk about the desire of the administrator, where they would like to have some cost bookends and what kinds of ways we're using right now to approximate what those costs might be.
Right, well, starting with the, I guess, the generation figures there, the first version of the resolution used our electricity, current electric load. This tries to, gives a total BTU version of that counts natural gas and transportation, and this then also moves that entirely, those units into electricity, so that's what we're currently at about 45,000 megawatt hours of electric load, but converting that into electricity for these other things would do that, and that would approximate to about 71 megawatts of installed solar capacity, just as by way of example. So that was just an exercise to try and broaden the term from electricity to energy. And the costs, you know, we don't have costs contained in here, but I think in conversations with this, there's room for the memorandum to accompany it to bookend effectively what we're talking about. We've had presentations from DTE around their My Green Power option that is currently something that's available. And the city could sign up tomorrow if so chose, and that would buy us into the 50% wind and solar option that's there, versus something like the student presentation, doing some or more of it or all of it on city facilities or through some arrangement. And so there are, we've kind of discussed a little bit among some of us where those true bookends are. And I think it's worth noting, as DTE presented at the time, since their presentation talked about a 25-year horizon going out, we'll say a little bit beyond the 2035 year here, that costs incurred by the city at current rates would exceed $210 million over that time. So, you know, that's one way to look at it. Over the next 25 years, just for electricity, that's through DTE, those are the costs. And to do, you know, again, caveated that it's, at this point, fairly back of the envelope. If we did our current load of electricity by solar, we think, staff has looked at this, you know, we would need on the order of about 37 megawatts if we, to just do electricity. And again, the 71 megawatt figure would be to do it all. So that really, I would say perhaps it's slightly more conservative figures for dollars per watt than the presentation we just had would put that in a $90 to $140 million kind of price tag at about a $2 to $3 per watt, depending if you're doing it all at once. If you do a bulk buy, you know, in 3 or 5 years, hey, $1.75, it's possible. When we look right now, I think somewhere in that 2 to 3, depending if it's piecemeal, it has to be more piecemeal or sequential, using a more conservative approach. So those dollar figures aren't in here, but I think that's roughly what I might be looking at. So again, a $90 to $140 million solar expense, dealing with a over $210 million electric obligation over the next 25 years. Some like to say when you pay for solar, you're buying your electricity up front. So in effect, we'd be buying all of that at once rather than spreading it out over time. So
John, can you read this into the record?
I can do so. Do we want more discussion first, or should I go ahead and read it so everybody, Wayne?
Let me ask a couple of questions about the numbers on the, in the conversion of the vehicle usage, was that simply taking a gallon of gas and working it that way?
It was taking everything from the BTU unit.
Right. So obviously with the dollar figures we're talking about, we would want to do a number of other things at the same time, I think, including energy efficiency to reduce our loads and converting as much of the vehicles to electric, so that which has a much higher efficiency than gas.
It's one of the hard things to do, or in a short period of time, is figure out what, and I think it was John and I conversed on this point, is at some level, we hope this city's footprint or consumption shrinks. It's likely that services at some level are going to expand even more efficiently. And so will that overall footprint of services, how will that absorb a portion of, say, a 20, 30% improvement in efficiency? So for simplicity's sake, this does just take a current figure and assumes there'll be some level of growth, certainly strong measures of efficiency absorbed within that.
And since the two biggest loads are very hard to do much with, the water treatment and the wastewater treatment plant, that's probably not too bad a figure.
Can I ask some
Sure.
follow-up questions? One piece in here that I was surprised by and don't remember seeing in previous versions, in the resolved, it says that this would be looking at specific actions excluding the use of RECs, unless specifically authorized by Energy Commission and City Council. What's the thinking behind that? When did that get added and why?
So we talked about that, I think, in the working session. I don't know if you were at the working session.
I missed that one.
Yeah, okay, so we talked about it then. The main thing that we wanted to, let's say, address with that clause is that we did not want, with the city's action, for the city to go out and simply buy RECs from renewable energy sources that are already in place. What we really want to do with this resolution is drive new energy installations so that we really truly are reducing greenhouse gas reductions, and we're not just buying RECs from an installation that was already installed, that's already delivering energy, and therefore, in a sense, bypassing what we really want to achieve is that the city is driving new renewable energy installations.
So I'll tell you my only hesitation with this is, I mean, I see this as we're asking the city administrator to look at a whole range of options from which then city council, with presumably our input and guidance, would make a decision. It feels like, to me, to cut off one of those options at this point rather than to have that on a suite of options and then be able to say why or why not do we think that that's the right among the options to choose from. It feels weird to me to be putting that in place here, particularly given that, you know, while I understand the concern with RECs, there are kind of higher and lower quality RECs, and, you know, you could bound it with, it has to be RECs that are, you know, third-party certified to be additional. I also think just, you know, maybe come down to a technicality here, but My Green Power, some people who didn't want us to go down that route, if that were a selected route, some people might say, how is that different than purchasing RECs? Because the proof that you've got it is that you are delivered the REC, that it's in your name, right? It's not directly building something for the city. So this one just, it just makes me a little nervous, feels a little odd in there, to take that option off the table from the start.
Can I make a comment on that? So I think this doesn't say that we can't do RECs, but the fact that we have to justify the RECs purchase means we'd ask all those hard questions, like where do the RECs come from and things like that, and it would drive us towards the use of the best RECs. And so, and you know, I think until the REC market is cleaned up, and every REC is, you know, a high quality REC, there has to be some question. So by forcing the issue, it's not to say that we wouldn't buy RECs. It's just that this way, the Energy Commission has to ask questions, and we have to say to the city, we think this is a good idea to buy these RECs, or we think that wouldn't be the best place to buy RECs. Maybe you should look at something else here.
But isn't the resolved asking the administrator to deliver a set of options to city council? Maybe it's just in the wording how this shows up here then, because I don't read this as saying that.
It says unless authorized by the Energy Commission and the City Council.
Yeah, but,
So he'd have to
but
come
that's in the sentence saying that directing the city administrator to provide actions. And so it's like, to me, it reads like the city administrator can't come with a set of options that include.
I think as it relates to RECs, that's probably true. Yeah.
I think this is a compelling argument if you draw a parallel to how the state's now handling integrated resource planning, which is very similar to what we're doing here. And when I commented to the state on how to do this kind of work, the best way is to go in without barriers and let the barriers be eliminated through screening. We do a high-level screen and a low-level screen. I think you'll find that RECs buying them exclusively to solve an issue like a cap goal will filter its way out right out of the block. So I don't think you have to worry about it coming back as being a solution, but I think you should not eliminate something out of the block. You should have an open slate. That's what the state's kind of, if you look at the legislature that's coming out for IRP, you'll find that to be true.
Mr. Chair, could we resolve this issue by adding an amendment or a whereas that suggests that RECs are a secondary option, but leaving them on the table?
Or that, just take out excluding and put including the use of RECs that meet the cap goals or in accordance with the CAP's
Or just
goals.
strike that whole clause after the comma in that sentence, I think. I don't know why RECs are called out specifically, if not other ones then, right? We don't say what else we're including or excluding.
Energy sources and
I'm
RECs.
personally okay with that, because we already have at the very end a requirement that
Okay.
recommendations have to pass through Energy Commission, and to both of your points, we can say, hey, we think there are other ways of doing this, better ways of doing it.
So it's just
We'll test your
and RECs,
smart
period?
Framework, John.
Right,
It'll be a
exactly.
test to see how it works. How about that?
Exactly.
So it's just and energy sources and RECs, period?
No, you
Just
take.
period,
Just period.
energy
Yeah.
sources,
Just
period.
Period, okay.
So we can consider that a friendly amendment?
I have one other question on the resolution. Nowhere in the document that I found, it gets into 2035. Now all of a sudden, we have a 2035 number in there. Is that coming from someplace? Nate, is that something from you, or?
No, it's from the presentation. I think that's through
It's from the
the,
Sierra Club.
yeah,
Sierra Club's
the
right.
100% campaign.
Okay.
That's where that number
I had a
derives.
Similar question on that, and I actually think, I mean, we just heard a presentation that actually has assumed time, at least for the electricity side of things. And I don't actually think it's wise to put a date in here, period. I think the best way to do it is to actually game this out. And I think our date should be as soon as feasible, right? And then we get a plan that comes back that's gonna put dates in there, but, you know,
That's
arbitrarily throwing out 2035 doesn't make any sense to me.
I think the mayor's compact actually has that date in there too, I think.
Well, maybe just one other comment, play catch ball with both of you. If we're going to use the SMART goal framework, T stands for time bound. And I think one of the things that we want to do, and your point's well taken, is to make this time bound and not to leave it open. And not just to simply say, hey, we want to go to 100% renewable, and we just keep on pushing this out. And there's a few things that we can do now because they're convenient, but we really want to do is say, hey, this is 2035. I might add just a couple of other points that tie in with that, as well as put this into broader context. The administrator has sent staff and a few others, including myself in my executive policy advisor role, some emails encouraging, actually, the city to look at moving to 100% renewable. In his emails, he named a number of other cities, both in Michigan and elsewhere, that have already adopted this. Some of those cities have it a little bit easier than others because they have municipal utilities. But for example, one of the cities in Michigan that is committed to going to 100% renewable was Grand Rapids. They initially set a date of 2020. I think that was extremely aggressive. And since then, they've now modified the date. It's not reflected on their website, but they've modified the date to 2025, still very aggressive. So what I would argue is, or what I would propose, is that we do put a time limit on this. I think that doesn't preclude anybody from pushing it out or moving it forward, but what I think it does is it says, lay out a plan that has a date. And then we look at that, and then we can say, ain't no way, or my God, this is so simple, we can move this date up. I think we still have that latitude. And I think if we just leave it completely open, then it makes it potentially more difficult for staff and potentially for us advising staff and saying, we need to now put together 5 different scenarios, a scenario for 2025, one for 2035, one for 2040, whatever, and that just potentially adds more work. So I completely support, I think, the thrust of your argument that we don't necessarily want to cast this in concrete, but we also want to be accountable to the citizens, and we also want to be accountable, in my view, to people looking at Ann Arbor and setting example in Ann Arbor, and not just saying, we passed a resolution, but it's has no teeth and it has no date, it's not time-bound.
Why don't we think about this because I also think 2035, you know, I don't remember what the Sierra Club proposed, but I don't think that should have much bearing on what we propose to the city here.
I agree.
But, you know, being involved in planning, you don't usually think, okay, what's the 18-year time horizon that we're thinking on here, right? I think we should pick something that's a more logical planning horizon at least. And I would say something like, you know, as soon as feasible, no later than, I think we should say 10 years from now. You know, something, and even if we're just, I hear your point, John, I think, you know, we're making it up at that point too, but we actually want a date on here. But I just think it strikes me as a random date that's 18 years out is no better than actually having a date.
I think that's where I was going, Mike. Another comment I would raise to that fact is we just hear about what the city council was talking about last night, which is things like we are losing revenue sources, we're running out of money, we need an income tax. This is an important topic, so is that. We're getting into some really high-level, important topics that kind of merge together. We have to decide what our priorities are. What's a priority in 2025? What's a priority in 2030? I'm probably going to be 6 feet under. I won't have a vote on 2030, but I think we need to think about what's important now and how do we set goals so that it's sustainable. Sustainability is what it's all about. It has to be real. And for us to throw numbers out or do something that's not aligned is important. I agree with you, John, that we should have it as a target, maybe put the word target after it or something, but proving it through a process that considers larger picture issues is really important.
So we could tie it back to the cap, which we start out with in the first paragraph, and just say operations in accordance with the cap's goals, which already sets goals for 225 and 2050 already.
My catch-ball with you on that is that, first of all, those are community-wide, and second, they never reach 100%. The highest they reach is 90% by 2050, and that's even more nebulous than what I think either Chuck or Mike are advocating for. The only reason why I think 2035 is more realistic, I mean, if you just look at the solar equivalent, 71 megawatts. I mean, just round figure, we talked about this already, let's just say $2, that's $150 million roughly. And to Chuck's point, that's probably not going to happen in the next 2 or 3 years. Now, obviously, that there's a capital outlay, but to Nate's point earlier, we save money then every year on that, so there is some kind of payback. But, you know, you'd have to float a huge bond and things like that. I mean, I'm okay, Frank, personally, just speaking for myself, with either approach. I think 10 years is highly unlikely, and therefore I thought, or I was on board with the Sierra Club suggestion of 2035 as being somewhat more realistic.
Could I, just a thought, if I could, since we have at the very end here, a plan to council through the Energy Commission no later than December of 2018, and to include measurable actions, including a target year to reach this goal, so perhaps you don't spell it out earlier in that resolved, but state that the report back in December will include the target year then. Not to kick the can, but at least give more.
You could also simply just, after 2035, put the words "or sooner."
Yeah, or I mean, I just, for all city operations and direct, and just stop, and direct the city administrator. And so you skip over the 2035 and just mention.
Or I like Dane's idea, 2035 or sooner.
I don't think you're putting enough constraints on the question then. If you're saying you want to meet a goal, but you're not putting a time or money cap on it. Like then we're not asking for a clear report.
Good.
So I think you want to constrain more of the problem to get the answer that you're looking for.
Well, the other option I could see here is to actually put in steps and say, we want, you know, in 5-year increments, percentage targets.
I would second that because a concern with the 2035 target for me is it's easy to say, okay,
Yeah, right.
2034 we'll buy
Yeah, we'll
into,
start.
100% renewables.
All right.
So, and I don't think that's the intent here, right?
Yeah, I think maybe both of those suggestions, you say 2035 or sooner, and then what Nate was saying, including measurable objectives, including, target year and interim steps. I actually think we need both those things, that tightens it up. And
Great.
ultimately, we're gonna get this, back to us. I will note with some humor here that in the original thing, somehow we had the Energy Commission authorizing or not authorizing the city to use RECs, which we actually can't do. So I'm glad we struck that, but, I like the power that was assigned to us in here. But I don't actually think we have that power.
We'll take anything, Mike.
Yeah,
I'll
it's
take
good.
it.
We could try,
Even if
but
it's
it's not
imaginary.
actually there.
Okay, does that meet everybody's?
So what are we saying? Operations in 5-year increments? Is that what we're saying?
Well, what if we said something like the following? In the very last sentence, and we'll still read this out loud when we're done.
Sure.
But no later than December 2018, and to include measurable actions and 5-year milestones.
Okay.
Or something to that effect, in the city budgets beginning in 2019.
Yep.
Your milestones and target date or something.
Well, we already have the target date up at the top, 2035 or sooner.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. I like that.
Didn't the energy legislation
Sorry.
Yes, Councilman.
Did the administrator look at the fiscal year 2019 recommendation in here?
I can't hear you.
The reference to fiscal year 2019, did the administrator see that?
I don't know that the administrator has seen this.
He would have seen
resolution.
the end of the first version,
Yeah.
I know, as he was, the questions that John had mentioned. He was-
Do you recall if that was in there at that time?
I
Yes,
believe
it
it might
was.
have been, but to your
That
point,
was.
I think I know where you're going in that
We
we're in a
did-
2-year
That would be in the
cycle.
middle of a 2-year budget
Right.
cycle, which we've already passed.
And so
I don't have
20 might be,
I don't have a problem moving it forward, but we might have to change it on the floor to 2020
right.
because
Okay.
there's a lot of trying to not change the budget in the middle of a budget cycle.
May I
Sure.
suggest one other hopefully friendly amendment? I think Mike kind of alluded to this, but the whereas on the Sierra Club strikes me a little oddly. Every other whereas in here is about something the city has decided or done or committed to or its values, and then that one feels like, whereas we invited somebody to come present to us. It feels out of place with the rest of it to me, and it feels to me like this should be as driven by all the goals and commitments that the city has made, which show up in the other whereas. It just strikes me weird.
I agree. That was the point I was going to make too. I think we should strike that clause. It's no offense to Sierra Club, but Sierra Club does political endorsements and pieces like that, and the substance of it doesn't need to include a particular NGO.
I'm fine either way with that, striking or not. We did just pass up from Environment through Council the clauses that had the Citizens Climate Lobby involved in a whereas, so
Yeah, that's true.
it could go either
I
way.
did too.
Yes, that's correct. By this very commission. Yes.
There's
Although
plenty of
I-
other entities that recommend this, though, not just Sierra Club. So
Yeah,
true.
we're singling out a single individual entity. I think if we're, to be fair, we should cite everyone that's pointing these things out. I don't know that I like that either. I'd rather see it go away to simplify it.
Yeah, does anyone have any problem with taking it out?
Nope.
Consider it friendly, and I think we've got it here.
I think we've got it.
Want me to read it?
Sure.
Or do we need to?
Let's read it.
Okay. Take a deep breath. Whereas, this is by, the title is Resolution Committee, the City of Ann Arbor, to using 100% clean and renewable energy for city operations. Whereas, in December 2012, with the passage by the Ann Arbor City Council of the Climate Action Plan, or CAP in parentheses, the City of Ann Arbor committed to an ambitious multi-strategy vision to address climate change by reducing its community-wide greenhouse gas emissions, and then in parentheses, 8% by 2015, 25% by 2025, and 90% by 2050 relative to year 2000 baseline carbon dioxide equivalent CO2e emission levels. That's in parentheses. Whereas the Energy Commission's cap-derived solar goals, 24 megawatt by 2025 and 30 megawatt by 2050, were unanimously endorsed by the Ann Arbor City Council in their June 2016 resolution authorizing a commitment to making the city of Ann Arbor a solar-ready community. Whereas in May 2017, the City Council passed a resolution calling for the city of Ann Arbor to follow LEED standards for existing and new city-owned building renovations and construction in the capital improvement plan, including the use of energy efficiency and renewable energy technologies. We have one extra comma in there that we need to strike. Whereas City Council unanimously reaffirmed local commitment to climate action in Resolution R-17-238, in parentheses, Resolution Committee committing the City of Ann Arbor to adopt, honor, and uphold Paris Climate Agreement goals, unquote, close parentheses. Whereas Mayor Christopher Taylor has endorsed and signed into the Global Covenant of Mayors for Climate and Energy and U.S. Climate Mayors Initiatives. Whereas city municipal government operations account for approximately 1.3% of total community-wide greenhouse gas emissions. Whereas city municipal government operations for building electricity, heating, and vehicles currently require approximately 283,000 million MMBTUs or million BTUs of energy per year, the potential equivalent in electrical units of 85,000 megawatt hours, or approximately 71 megawatt of installed solar capacity. Whereas the city should lead by example in the achievement of its cap targets. Whereas the city of Ann Arbor has appointed an executive policy advisor for sustainability who has been tasked with implementing a SMART goal framework, i.e. specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, with a time-bound target for all cap-related renewable energy initiatives in Ann Arbor. Resolved that the Energy Commission recommends that the City Council commit the City of Ann Arbor to meet the 100% clean and renewable goal for all city operations by 2035 or sooner, and direct the city administrator to provide specific actions using the SMART framework, how the City of Ann Arbor can do so through a combination of energy efficiency measures and renewable energy sources. The Energy Commission further proposes that Council direct the administrator to provide a multi-year action plan to Council through the Energy Commission no later than December 2018, and to include, and I just reversed the order here, but I think it makes more sense, and to include 5-year target milestones and measurable actions in the city budgets beginning in fiscal year 2019.
Thank you. Very good.
So I have a question to the very last line again to Jason. You talked about some dates maybe changing. If I'm not mistaken, actually, fiscal year 19 actually starts in the middle of 18, right? So having a plan presented no later than December 2018 and inclusion in fiscal year 19 really doesn't make sense. It really makes more sense to have plan that would be presented to us and then debated and discussed and then finally included in fiscal year 2020. Is that correct?
What I was stating was that, yes, the implementation in the formal budget in 2020 is likely more realistic. But again, I'm I'm not opposed to bringing this forward as is and having it altered on the floor at council or in between here and there.
Do you think it would be better to have this plan presented earlier than December? Like maybe in September 2018?
Yeah,
Simply
right,
because
then we get it in.
what budget discussion there is really starts, we were told by the administrator that December was too late and that we really should be putting stuff out before that in order to actually have it be considered while
It's a year, let's do
discussion is going on.
I think that's a great point.
Let's do September.
And Wayne is exactly right. That's what he told us when we submitted for, at that time, fiscal year 18 climate funding proposals. We made those proposals at the end of the year, and to Wayne's point, that was exactly his feedback. It was really a little bit too late because a lot of the bottom-up city budget planning already starts in September. And the proposal for the budget is more or less worked out by the end of the year. So I think that's a great idea.
So we're changing December to September and keeping FY 2019.
No, it'd still be fiscal year 2020.
Still 20, okay.
Minor point.
More discussion?
Real quickly, Commissioner Mursky, in the second, whereas 24 megawatt by 2025 and 30 megawatt by 2050, the 30 jumped out as something I don't think I'd seen before, and we just quickly checked. I don't believe that's in
I
the
was reading it,
council's
and that
resolution.
was...
Okay, so the 24 and 2025 is fine?
Yes.
I just think that, so.
I don't remember the 30 by 2050.
Right,
I don't know
where that came from.
I don't know why I didn't catch that
Okay.
earlier, but I just strike that.
Okay.
Yeah, great. If there's no further discussion, I'd like to call this to a vote. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? It passes unanimously. Thank you for all the fine work on that.
Standing.
Moving right along.
So now we need that U of M project work
Yeah.
to be realized.
Okay.
Resolution of intent regarding applications of potential Washtenaw County millage to support community mental health department, county sheriff operations, and policing jurisdictions rebate. As the community may remember, there is going to be on the November ballot a millage on the county ballot, and that since the city has its own police department, we will be getting some money back from that millage if it should pass. And so the city council has decided that it would be good for the public to know how they plan on using this money should it appear. We were asked to comment and make a resolution in support of that usage. And whose resolution is this?
So, actually, this was drafted by the city administrator, and it was sent out to a group of people representing the Energy Commission, the Environmental Commission, and the Ann Arbor Climate Partnership. We met with the city administrator. There was also a memo that preceded this draft. We met with the city administrator last Wednesday and gave recommendations on how we felt the climate action funding should be spent. That meeting went very well. After that meeting, we got the first draft of this, and based on that draft and consistent with what we presented last Wednesday, we made some changes which were sent back to the administrator. He took those changes and adopted those exactly as we had submitted them, so the document actually that Nate printed out was actually originated by the administrator. So he's seen this.
Okay. Someone has to introduce it for us to vote on it. So
I would like
will
to-
you take ownership?
I would take ownership.
Is there a second? Okay. Discussion on the resolution.
I think maybe just, and Jason or somebody else jump in here to clarify the millage. So the millage is an additional 1 mil countywide. It's to provide additional funding for policing and for mental health services, where primarily outside of Ann Arbor, those services are seen as being underfunded. And because in Ann Arbor, the view is that those are adequately funded, then we would not spend money on those improvements, but rather on what City Council had adopted 2 or 3 meetings ago, was this 40% for affordable housing, 40% for climate funding, and 20% for improving bicycle and pedestrian safety. And that's what's reflected in here. And what we've simply done that's relevant to this commission is make a recommendation on how the 40% would be spent. Just sorry for talking so much here, but
go ahead.
There's, we did make more specific recommendations on the 3 programs that are referenced here: Energy Smart Ann Arbor, Charge Up Ann Arbor, and Solar for All. They've been removed here to provide a little latitude, but the administrator knows, and senior staff that were present in the meeting, that we gave particular figures, and the order that they're shown here is the order in which we would recommend spending be allocated. So it's roughly 2/3 Energy Smart, not quite 1/3 Charge Up Ann Arbor, and roughly there's about $50,000 for Solar for All, totaling up to roughly $900,000 a year.
Great. Commissioner Schreiber?
Just to tack on to Mr. Murski's comments, that there's an idea that if the money collected by the county would effectively be double taxing us on police services, which we are already collaboratively paying the county for sheriff work. And so there was a concern at the county's level that our residents would see themselves being double taxed for something that, as a community, we've already tacitly agreed we don't need additional service around. Our policing is strong, and we have a very safe community. And so the rebate portion of the millage was to try to satiate that. It is not 100% rebate of what we would be putting in, but it would be the lion's share because of the mental health component. And then I think what John didn't quite say, but is that the administrator and the council members who brought this resolution of intent forward a few months ago was that to showcase to the county that we believe that our municipality would be supportive of the county's interests in the county's health, and that we would like to showcase to our residents that we would do something meaningful and substantive with that rebate, that wasn't just to toss it into the general fund and pay for money that we're losing off of something else.
Yes, Commissioner Schreiber.
Yeah, the only thing that I'd add, and I think this resolution overall looks good, we did have one point of disagreement with the city administrator that's still reflected in here, and that's whether these would be recurring or non-recurring expenses. And I'd note that we said that we don't want them as non-recurring expenses. That's what it says in this piece. My suggestion is simply that we just eliminate that word. So it just says.
Where is it?
It's on the second page for the following, just before you get to the bullet points. We should just say for the following purposes, because I don't want to support, we told him the opposite, he had a difference of opinion on it, but let's at least not pass a resolution that supports against what we had proposed.
Yeah, I'm fine with that.
I'm fine with that.
John?
I'm fine with that too.
Good point.
So just so everybody understands also in the audience, the millage is for 8 years, and our position was that in the 8 years, the city should give it an old college try, so to speak, to make this funding recurring. The administrator's position was that he did not want to put the city in a position where there's going to be recurring expenses, for example, by hiring full-time employees. And so that is why the non-recurring is in here. But I think, Mike, you're absolutely right. It's still our position that if we have a 2050 goal, and for that matter, 2025, and now maybe even a 2035 goal for renewables, that we're not going to get far enough if we just treat this as something that we do for 8 years and then give up on or start all over again from zero.
Excellent
My
point.
assumption on that is that we deliver these programs as a city, and they're doing great things, and we'll find the money for it, and we don't have to worry. It's more than 8
Right.
years out is beyond any budget planning anyway.
Right.
So I don't think we have to like beat it over the head with the city administrator on that, but I also don't want a resolution that
Good
is
catch.
opposition to
Thank you.
Excellent.
Good point.
Yeah.
Other questions, comments?
Does anybody else feel that this is kind of odd? And this is based on my work with the Fed. We've got a millage we're proposing for community mental health, and now we're appropriating it in totally non-community mental health areas. Granted that part of this millage was directed toward law enforcement, which is a huge part of community mental health, but it seems like we're taking that appropriation and spending it on other things that we feel, important. It just seems kind of odd that we're not spending any of it or appropriating any of it for what I think is a bigger deal, which is the opioid crisis and other mental health type issues. It just seems odd. And I know this is way higher than this
Time change drives me
commission,
crazy.
but I just don't know why we're doing that.
I have 3 points to that question, but I also look forward to the debate on the floor if the commission so sees fit. One, the way that the language is written by the county, which is not our jurisdiction at all, would have it sent directly to the general fund. And then that would get used for an engineer's time or a road or anything. 2, from my lens as a townie, as an environmentalist, I feel like the millage that the county's putting forward is for community health in general, in a lot of different ways. And from my lens, these 3 aspects do that. And third, community mental health, the city tends to, the city, for a lot of the social service net, the city pays into a fund that the county administers, and the county delivers those services, or the county facilitates third-party nonprofits doing so. So in some ways, we're not in the game of delivering those services. But I'm not saying you're right or wrong.
Jason, to my question, those services are for a reason. Why are they focused on those particular services they're offering to these communities? It's for the crisis I mentioned, not for appropriating it to bicycle lanes and things like that. Not that those aren't bad things. I'm not saying that.
Right.
I'm just saying it sounds like they should have had that as part of the millage. I think it's gonna confuse a lot of the people that are gonna vote on this, and I'm concerned that it's not got a chance if it's gonna be appropriated the way it's stated. That's just my own 3 cents.
I completely agree. And the debate that was had a few months ago was, I strongly believe that it's not, the county millage would not pass if the city of Ann Arbor residents don't get behind it. And which is a worse scenario, to have our residents believe it's just going to go into the general fund and disappear, or for us to have a conversation about what our community values are and push for that. That circles around your question, but that was the decision that was being faced at the time.
Okay.
I would just add, I feel like it's important that, since not everybody who's watching on TV or in the audience has seen the full language of this, the language of this is not in any way saying we support or oppose the millage. This is not about our perspective on that as a commission, but it says that if the voters approve the millage, we're saying that instead of putting the money into the general fund, we recommend that the money go into these things. So that's really the gist of how I read this, and I hope I'm interpreting that.
That is correct.
That is correct.
And these 3 items are items that have been identified by council as being underfunded and priorities.
In writing, it's in the preamble, the introduction to the fiscal year 18 and 19 budgets, that these are priority areas, and that, not explicitly stated, but in fact so that they are funded with less resources than the city and residents would like to see.
So can I ask a follow-up question on that? This is, this has been put together with the, based on the input of various commissions saying these are the things that are lacking funding. Are there other groups putting forward other proposals for how the funds should be allocated that are different than this? Is there a community health group that's saying it should all go to that, or are there other interest groups that are vying for this, or trying to make it?
No, actually, the percentages were actually dictated by council.
Yeah.
So what we're doing is refining the usage, basically.
Got it.
And
Okay.
basically
So council
just.
has gone through their process of getting the input to derive this.
Yes.
And by the way, a lot of the discussions that we've had here tonight, you can go back and watch the tape, and a lot of those discussions were held between city council and also with comments from the audience as well.
Yes.
So the level of our discussion is then to recommend how the 40% of energy funds be spent. Is it useful to tie that to the resolution we just passed and to say that this should be a source of funding used to implement a move to 100% renewable energy?
I would hate to see the resolution we just passed say, well, we can't do it because the other thing didn't pass. So.
Okay.
I mean, they
But
want
what
to
if
commit
someone
them to
looks at
doing
this,
something.
the resolution we just passed and says, that looks expensive, how do we pay for it?
So my sense is there'll be lots of ways to pay for it. There'll be a bunch of different things that are going to have to get done. This may or may not be part of it, but I'm sure if this gets funded, that's exactly what it will do, is feed this other.
Okay, so does
100%.
it fit into one of the 3 programs
So-
that are listed there, or can we
Yeah.
make reference to it
So-
in addition?
Specifically, should we go into a little bit of the discussion we had
Sure,
on
go ahead.
Wednesday? So the proposal that was originally made from the city was that most of the spending from the 40% proceeds going to climate funding would be used for city operations and for capital projects. And our argument was that, as in the previous resolution, that because the city is only roughly 1.5%, 1.3% of the total community-wide greenhouse gas emissions accounted for that we really need communities-facing programs to really look at the other 98.5%. So specifically to your question, the only thing that particularly addressed in the details what of this money would be spent on potential city-related activities is the Charge Up Ann Arbor program, where we specifically mentioned a dollar figure that for the total program we recommended roughly $250,000, $80,000 of which would be applied to the city's green fleets policy, in other words, reducing greenhouse gas emissions from the city's vehicle fleet. So that's the only thing in these programs that is explicitly targeted. That doesn't mean that we couldn't use some for solar projects. To your point, that's some of this can be projects, community solar projects that go on schools or city buildings or whatever, things like that. But the only part specifically that was mentioned, not in here now, but in the backup documentation, was the charge up portion going to city fleets. And the request was that they pair that with a city request for grants to basically double the effectiveness of that, potentially piggybacking off of funds that are coming from the VW diesel issue that is going to be refunded to or paid to each state, which then the state will be paying out in grants to individual municipalities and programs. Long, sorry, response.
Other questions, comments?
Let's call the vote.
Let's call the vote. All in favor?
Do we need to read this?
No?
I don't know if we need to or not. You tell us.
No.
I'm not volunteering someone else.
Oh.
I don't think we need to read it.
We don't need to read it. If the public wants to read it, it'll be part of the record and they can look it up online.
It's on the Legistar item right now.
It is.
Okay, so Google Legistar and find it.
Well done, Nate.
All in favor?
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? It passes unanimously. Thank you very much. A lot of good work. It's great to see the administrator
Yes.
seeing eye to eye with us on things.
Nice.
By the way, he explicitly asked that we pass this resolution as well as the environmental, so that he can go to council and to the city and say, our key advisory boards or commissions in this area both endorse this plan.
Committee updates. Climate Action Plan. I don't know if there's
I think that last discussion kind of dovetails pretty well in
Yeah.
terms of climate
Yeah.
funding and the like.
renewable energies.
Community Solar now has a shared space that's set up. I don't know if you want to say any more about the Community Solar Subcommittee.
So we have a subcommittee that's looking into community solar offerings with the intent of evaluating those and distilling them down and basically going to residents and saying, we've looked at these and we encourage you to look at them, and hopefully also where we would even potentially negotiate on, in a sense, looking at the city as a whole and saying with the population that we have and the buying power that we would potentially get better rates than if people might do this individually. So there's a subcommittee formed, several commissioners here are on the subcommittee, and we've had 2 meetings, and our target deliverable is to come up with recommended offerings by the end of the year for consideration by the whole commission, the Energy Commission, and then eventually potentially some approval process maybe through the city or council or whatever.
Depending upon what they are.
Yes.
But the collaboration, I have not received anything on the shared folder drive yet.
Okay. I'll follow up with you. I sent it out and I heard from others, so it should.
Yeah, you sent me that.
Yeah.
That should be set up.
Yeah, it is set up, yeah.
Is it? Oh, okay.
Yep.
Maybe I missed something.
I'll try to share with you directly. You were
Okay.
set up initially, so.
Yep.
Hey Nate, a question for you under this committee. I read where the hydro facilities that are generating right now need some capital improvements. I also know that there's 2 hydro facilities that are no longer equipped, they're dams. Is there any interest in the city tasking this commission to look into this in parallel?
We've looked at it in the past, so it's been a little while. As some may know, we have former feasibility studies that looked at conventional hydro, both the VA and our own. We've looked at the issue of microturbines or the like, or developing alternatives. I mean, certainly myself would welcome that, revisiting that.
Okay.
I think it's the hurdle is getting over the institutional understanding and framework that, hey, the VA did it, we've done it a couple times, it just doesn't pencil out for these other 2 to do conventional hydro. But sure, anytime there's a different approach or new angle to it, or especially an alternate technology, that would be, I think, the way to go about it. And I know we made a small effort there a little while ago that didn't go too far, but.
The path of resistance was strong.
That's
Let's
right.
put it that way.
Was it like a dam, perhaps?
Yeah. Yeah.
Maybe
Well,
that's
I'm always happy to be rallied to overcome
maybe
our
that's
path
another
of resistance.
another
So
student project.
We're lining them up tonight. Sustainable funding, we certainly talked about it with the previous resolution. I should also say that the letter that we sent to the administrator also asked them to look into other options in case the millage doesn't pass. Basically saying we need to do these things regardless of whether the money comes through from the millage. If it doesn't come through, we need to look at alternatives.
And one other thing, we also indicated that we would like to look at potential ordinances with the city's help that would also provide not only, maybe I'll put it this way, maybe a little bit coercion in some regards to raise energy awareness and energy-related actions.
public input.
Could we go back to renewable energy just for a second? Josh,
Sure.
you want to say something about the Solar Faithful project?
Sure. So we've been having meetings on Solar Faithful. We've been looking at houses of worship to partner with them and put solar panels on it, make it kind of a community solar project. We're currently looking at financial models. That's kind of more or less where we're at. I don't know if there's anything else, Mark, that you wanted me to.
I think there's actually been 10 candidates step forward on this project. They can only select 3, and several of them are already submitted their energy data. So it's everything's timing, and it's actually moving. So
Yeah.
Yeah, the DOE, this is a sunshot program where they kind of did some nominal technical assistance, so we have access to a solar coach and some resources to evaluate some of these models, and as said, there's several that are going to come forward.
And we're teaming up with Michigan Interfaith Power and Light, who also seems to be hitting their stride these days, and so it's a great confluence. It's working well. And thanks a lot to Josh, who's keeping this thing moving.
Yes, thank you. Public input. Anyone still awake? Anyone have anything they'd like to say?
I have to step in for a second.
Walk up to the mic and tell us who you are.
Professor, University of Michigan, in Programming the Environment and Earth and Environmental Sciences. And I applaud the city for enacting the Climate Action Plan. As an observer, I think I hear we had ambitious goals that we're not going to meet. Let's create more ambitious goals that I can tell you you're not going to meet. And as a father raising 4 kids who continually want to know why old white men create goals that we never meet, no offense to the female members of the Energy Commission, I think that's what we're hearing. You know, you have 25% reductions by 2025. You have a landfill that with 56 acres of solar panels, the numbers are correct. The numbers are as good as you guys could calculate. The numbers are as good as you get from 5 Lakes Energy. The numbers are as good as you get from any entity that you would contract with. So, you know, it sometimes when I hear the student numbers, they're the real numbers. They're realistic. 56 acres of solar panels is 37 gigawatt hours of electricity a year. For a city that has a municipal load of 45, that's 84%. So that's an 84% replacement of your current fuel mix, which is 69% coal. So if the city wants to put its money where its mouth is, then what the city should do is create a resolution that's not more ambitious and, unachievable, but actually create a resolution that says, let's do the landfill. Let's partner with DTE. Let's get beyond the rhetoric, and let's make it happen so that you put yourselves on the map as not being a place where press releases come out in MLive, look at the city of Ann Arbor, look at this wonderful goal. Oh, footnote, the last goals we created, we're not going to meet them. And so, you know, I have to stand up because it's just, as an outsider, you know, one of the concerns about government is that government loves to create goals that it can't meet. And I think what we have done over the summer, and it's been a lot of fun, and with Nate and others who have been active, it's been a lot of fun working on this project, is that these are realistic goals, right? Whether it's a 10-year payback, a 12-year payback, a 14-year payback, you have a goal. The goal is emissions reductions. If you want to meet that goal, you have to get beyond whether it's $1.75, whether it's $1.95, whether it's $2.05. That's irrelevant. The goal is the goal, right? You have a revenue base of $8.5 billion for the city of Ann Arbor. The money is there. I think the willingness from DTE, our local utility, is there to partner with the city, and that might be a big hug you have to make. But I just wanted to make that comment that it's time for the city of Ann Arbor, for the University of Michigan, for the school district to move beyond the rhetoric and actually set goals that are low-hanging fruit and meet them. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. To maybe clarify 1 or 2 things, we had a presentation by Josh a few meetings ago that says that we're actually going to meet the 25 by 25 for the whole community, largely because of DTE's moving from coal to natural gas. And you're more than welcome to work with us on the solar subcommittee that's actually looking at the landfill site. And we, as soon as we've actually looked at that enough, we will be coming forth with a presentation on that. And hopefully a resolution to move ahead with that. So, but great comments. And I might throw it back at you is the part of the climate action plan that we don't have any control over is the university's reductions, which they're currently moving in the opposite direction, I think. So I couldn't resist, I'm sorry. Items for the next agenda.
Well, we do have Mr. Topfer will be joining us to talk about
Wonderful.
coupling of solar and electric vehicles.
All right.
And as well, an update on the water treatment plants, carbon and mercury program, where the Water Utilities Energy Challenge. Faculty from Wayne State will be on hand to discuss that in a little bit more detail and to share a bit more information on that. Real-time adjustments to water treatment plant, mostly filtration processes that have positive benefits to mercury and CO2 emissions. So
Cool.
that'll be next time as well.
So I would like to propose another agenda item, either for the next meeting or certainly the one after that, and that is there was a joint subcommittee of the Energy and Environmental Commission on metrics, picking up on the public comment. We fully endorse what you're saying, and we formed a committee several months ago, met a half dozen or so times, had reported out to the Environmental Commission what we would like to measure related to energy and environment, and talking specifically about exactly what the metric would be, to some degree talking about how it would be displayed, replacing some of the dashboard indicators that are currently on the city's website, and most importantly, using those metrics in these meetings and hopefully also in city administration and in city council, so that indeed we are accountable for the goals, for achieving the goals that we set, whether it's 500 affordable housing units, or as the city once committed 10 or more years ago, 5,000 solar rooftops, and we have maybe 200. So absolutely, you're right, and the only way that we do that is start to measure ourselves and be accountable to ourselves and to our residents for meeting the goals that we've set. And so we would like to report out and tell you what we recommend that we do. Josh and Sarah can take the lead on that.
Great. I look forward to it. Anything else? If there's nothing else, I will call this meeting adjourned at approximately 12 minutes to 8. Good meeting, everyone.
Good meeting, everyone.
Thank you all for coming. Thank you for reporting out on your project.
Great job, you guys.
It's always nice to have some community involvement.